Warring parties in Yemen failed to agree on expanding the truce due to Houthi rejection. The chairman of the Presidential Leadership Council, Rashad Al-Alimi, accuses Houthis of being hostile to peace. Houthi militia attacks military and residential areas in Al-Dala hours after truce expired. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English News with me, Shahzad Abdelbay. Yesterday, the UN Special Envoy Hans Grunberg announced the failure of his efforts to make warring parties renew the truce. He added that an extended truce would provide additional critical benefits to the population. This report has more details.
Yemen's warring parties have failed to achieve an agreement to prolong a statewide ceasefire, jeopardizing the country's longest period of peace since its violent civil war started. The UN envoy to Yemen, Hans Grunberg, issued a statement urging all parties to abstain from committing acts of provocation as the discussions continue, after the October 2nd deadline for extending the accord was missed. According to the envoy, the ceasefire has made Yemenis' lives easier. The United Nations brokered truce went into force in April, raising expectations for a lengthier halt in combat as Yemen's civil conflict reached its 8th year. The destructive battle began in 2014 when the Houthis, supported by Iran, took Sana'a and parts of northern Yemen, forcing the government into exile. International humanitarian organizations have denounced the inability to prolong the ceasefire deal, which ended on Sunday. The Norwegian Refugee Council's country director in Yemen has said that today's announcement that an agreement to renew the truce in Yemen has not been reached is deeply disappointing. It is a missed opportunity to help millions of Yemeni civilians out of the brutal conflict that the warring parties have dug the country into. Humanitarian groups have also urged the country's parties to reassess their stance, abstain from pulling the trigger, set aside their disagreements, and extend the arm of diplomacy, as they have effectively done for the past 6 months. The previous 2 months have demonstrated that a resolution is within reach if they agree to focus on them rather than fight. Earlier, Yemen's government stated that it was eager to prolong the truce despite certain misgivings about its terms. Meanwhile, rebel Houthi forces said on Sunday that they may resume strikes on oil installations in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, the conflict, which has recently morphed into a regional proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, has killed over 150,000 people, including over 14,500 civilians, and has caused one of the world's greatest humanitarian crises.
The Yemeni government called on the international community to take a strong and clear position in condemning the Houthis' blocking of peace efforts. Prime Minister Ma'in Abdel Malik stressed that peace means ending the war, adding that the Houthis continue to waste chances to bring peace to the country. For his part, Yemeni Foreign Minister Ahmed bin Mubarak stressed that his government dealt with the UN proposal to extend the truce. He pointed out that the Houthis collected more than 200 billion Yemeni riyals in the truce. He added that the militia did not achieve their obligations and refused to open roads and continued violating the ceasefire. Chairman of the PLC, Rashad Al-Alimi, accused the Houthi militia of blocking peace. In a meeting with the United Nations Special Envoy Hans Grunberg, the chairman of the Presidential Leadership Council talked about the hostile indications of the Houthi militia's position, which undermines peace efforts made by the international community. This report has more details.
Chairman of the Yemeni Presidential Leadership Council, Rashad Al-Alimi, described the Iran-backed Houthi militia as hostile to peace after they thwarted United Nations attempts to extend the nationwide truce. The truce will not be extended for a third time in spite of international and regional efforts. In his meeting with the United Nations envoy to Yemen, Hans Grunberg, in Riyadh, Al-Alimi stressed the Presidential Council commitment to a fair and sustainable peace based on the national, regional, and international references. He underscored the need to intensify international efforts to pressure the Houthis to seriously deal with the peace efforts and to prioritize the interests of the Yemeni people over their own and Iran. Talks with Grunberg highlighted the legitimate government's efforts to ease the humanitarian suffering of the people throughout the country. The United Nations said on Sunday Yemen's warring sides failed to reach an agreement to extend the truce. The truce initially took effect in April and raised hopes for a longer pause in fighting as Yemen's war entered its 8th year. Grunberg said he regrets that an agreement hasn't been reached, but thanked the legitimate government for engaging positively in talks to extend the truce. He called on leaders to continue to endeavor to reach an agreement. The truce had established a partial opening of Sana'a airport and the Red Sea port of Hodeida. The subsequent month have seen flights start again from Sana'a airport to Jordan and Egypt. It also called for lifting a Houthi blockade on Taiz, the country's third largest city, but little progress had been made there after talks aimed at reopening local routes stalled. Another sticking point is how salaries of public employees will be funded, many of whom have not been compensated for years. The government asked the international stakeholders to pressure the rebels into paying the salaries from the revenue they collect from Hodeida port.
The ongoing conflict in Yemen has destroyed most of the educational facilities infrastructure. In Midi district in Hajjah, teachers are suffering as they have not been paid their salaries. Students are forced to study on the banks as their schools were damaged by the war. This report has more details.
Textbooks are scattered under the rubble of the war and among mines. The fires of war destroyed the educational sector in Hajjah governorate, but the insistence and determination to create an educated generation made them resist the hard conditions, the lack of funding, and the cut of textbooks and salaries. The teachers in Medi district resolved to collect the rest of the seats and curricula inside the ruins of the destroyed schools, despite the danger of mines and explosive devices surrounding them.
These are the books we collected amid the debris of the destroyed school, and we found more than 15 explosive devices planted there as well.
Huts and tents in the middle of the sand dunes to save what is left of education and stop the effects of the war on an entire generation and satisfy the students' passion for science and knowledge. 26 schools were destroyed, including 17 schools in the districts of the Midi and Hayran completely, and some of them need restoration as a result of the severe damage they sustained.
The most salient obstacles that obstruct the educational process in Midi district is the lack of school buildings, in which there were around 15 schools that were totally destroyed and students are receiving their lessons in tents. Deficiency of textbooks has also contributed to obstructing education in the governorate.
Students are studying here because we've no other place for them. So we decided to build these tents ourselves, and we worked on building them to facilitate the learning process for children.
The educational sector in Yemen embodies the suffering and tragedy of an entire generation as a result of the raging war that is entering its 8th year, in light of the absence of the international organization's role in supporting education, which is the basic building block for the future.
8 years of the conflict in Yemen has created the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, according to the United Nations. This report has more details.
Yemen has been mired in a civil war since late 2014, when the Iran-backed Houthi militia seized control of several northern cities and forced the Saudi-backed Yemeni government out of Sana'a. Houthi fighters, which had opposed the central government for a decade, launched an offensive in mid-2014, seizing parts of territory. Their conquests include the capital Sana'a and the Red Sea port of Hodeida, a crucial entry point for imports and humanitarian aid. The conflict in Yemen between the Iran-backed Houthi rebels and pro-government troops escalated in March 2015, when a Saudi-led military coalition intervened in support of the loyalists, launching airstrikes on the Houthi rebels. On March 27, the coalition says it has full control of Yemen's airspace and has destroyed aircraft seized by the Houthis. In June 2018, pro-government fighters backed by Saudi and Emirati ground forces launched an offensive to retake Hodeida, the entry point for 90% of Yemen's imports. United Nations brokered talks in Sweden between the government and Houthi rebels opened in December, yielding breakthroughs including a ceasefire in Hodeida. In early 2021, the Houthis resumed an offensive to seize oil-rich Ma'rib, the government's last northern stronghold, as well as intensifying drone attacks against Saudi Arabia. According to the United Nations, the civil war has killed hundreds of thousands of people. The UN describes the situation in Yemen as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Around 80% of its 30 million people depend on some form of aid for survival. But the UN warns aid agencies are being forced to slash life-saving programs due to a shortfall in funding. A UN-brokered truce goes into effect on April 2 and brings a sharp reduction in hostilities. Its terms include resuming commercial flights from Sana'a airport, allowing fuel shipments into the rebel-held port of Hodeidah, and opening talks about lifting the 6-year Houthi blockade of Taiz. Despite sporadic clashes, the 2-month truce was renewed in June and again in August. The UN Special Envoy Hans Grunberg attempts to extend the truce to 6 months and expand its terms to include paying civil servant salaries and opening routes into Taiz. However, the Houthi militia reject the proposal, and the October 2nd deadline passes with no agreement to renew.
Hours after the deadline of the truce ended, the Houthi rebels intensified their attacks on Al-Dala. They targeted the positions of the joint forces with heavy shelling as well as populated areas.
The Houthi militia shelled some of our positions in Al-Fakhir front. The shelling was intense, but we managed to silence the source of fires. The militia targeted the residential areas and the farms of the people, resulting in many losses.
Government forces stopped a Houthi drone belonging to the Iranian-backed Houthi militia west of Ma'rib. This coincides with the outbreak of violent confrontations yesterday evening on Taiz, Hodeidah and Al-Dala, shortly after the UN envoy announced the failure of the truce in Yemen. Earlier, the Houthi militia launched artillery shelling, targeting army positions west of Ma'rib, and according to local reports, the Iranian Houthi militia had sent military reinforcements to the front lines in Ma'rib and Al-Jawf before the end of the UN truce. Coming next in the news. New power station launched in Ma'rib to solve frequent electricity power cut.
أقول لك راحت بالغداء لأهلها شلت الغداء وراحت بالأهلها في المزرعة، والمزرعة ركبت على حمار ما حتى نص المزرعة وانفجر فيها اللغم، دعست على اللغم وانفجر فيهم. الحمار انتهى الماء ترى تبقعت رجليها كامل. نغير منها نغير الشبالة اللي هي البيت سابها من دور رجليها، صافناها طبية أقرب طبية وصافناها لا هي بطلت رجليها كامل.
التزود هلي قبل العام وطبعت تحت الزوايا.
Welcome back. The Norwegian Refugee Council expressed its disappointment after not extending the truce. In a statement, the council said the warring parties have missed a chance to help millions of Yemenis out of the conflict. It called on the parties to put aside their differences and extend diplomacy, as they have done successfully for the past 6 months. The United Nations said that millions of displaced Yemenis need peace. According to the organization, the truce in Yemen has given Yemenis real hope and much needed relief, and that more than 4 million displaced across the country need peace. The United Nations International Organization for Migration announced that more than 25 million people live below the poverty line in Yemen. More than 25 million people live below the poverty line, and millions of children are out of school. The organization added, IOM called the donors to provide emergency support to the people on the move and host communities. USAID has provided a grant of more than $28 million to support UNICEF's plan to expand early detection of child malnutrition. This report has more details.
In Yemen, children's lives are critically endangered. Nationwide, 4 out of every 5 children require immediate humanitarian assistance. Food and other basics are becoming more expensive as a result of fuel shortages. More than half of the population lives in poverty, which is causing families to struggle to make ends meet. According to the United Nations World Food Programme, 17.4 million Yemenis are suffering from extreme hunger. This figure is likely to rise to 19 million in the second half of the year. Of greatest concern is the 31,000 people facing extreme hunger levels now. In addition, approximately 2.2 million children under the age of 5, including 538,000 severely malnourished, are projected to suffer from acute malnutrition over the course of 2022. The Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance of the U.S. Agency for International Development has given UNICEF $28.9 million to assist the organization's mission to expand the early identification and treatment of child malnutrition. This money will be used mostly to purchase ready-to-use therapeutic food for children. The most immediate, obvious, and potentially fatal form of malnutrition is severe acute malnutrition. It raises the risk of death in children under the age of 5 by up to 11 times compared to children who are well nourished. Most of the time, ready-to-use therapeutic food may be used to treat these children, enabling them to recuperate in their own homes and communities as opposed to in a hospital. Conflict and economic crises continue to be the primary causes of severe food insecurity and malnutrition in Yemen, which is worsened by the insecurity of humanitarian aid. Both characteristics are expected to persist in 2022, with the possibility of further escalation of war, leading to more displacement. Furthermore, as a result of the ongoing battle, access to public services has been significantly hampered, resulting in salary delays, cuts, poor access to health care, insufficient access to water, and other services such as education and energy.
The Houthi militia forced school students in Sana'a to attend its sectarian activity in As-Sab'in Square. The militias took the students from inside their classrooms on trucks and buses by force of arm towards the 70 Square to mark the birthday of the Prophet. The students and their parents expressed their anger at these practices and violations, which target children and young people. They said that the Houthi militia threaten those who do not attend by sending them to detention centers and expelling them from schools. After years of frequent power cuts in Ma'rib, a new gas station was launched. This new station supplies electricity to the entire governorate. This report has more details.
Electricity has been a concern for many citizens and displaced people in Ma'rib Governorate during the past years, especially those living in the deserts during the summer when energy consumption increases with the rise in temperature. Hours and days during which the electricity supply was absent from the city and its neighborhoods. Voices denouncing the poor service were louder, and with that the situation worsened.
شهدت مأرب خلال السنوات الماضية
Maghreb has witnessed an expansion and overcrowding of infrastructure in the governorate during the past years, which exerted a lot of pressure on electricity consumption, leading to several power cuts that could last for 1 or 2 days. In recent days, a gas station was established in the governorate, providing a continuous electricity supply to all the citizens without any cuts.
Gas energy is a new project that brings light to the city. Maghreb has called for the electricity crisis. The plant's production capacity covers all districts, with a production capacity of 167 megawatts with an overflow of 54 megawatts. According to the assurances of those concerned, it will also save about $5 million a month to pay for the purchased energy, not to mention the huge quantities of fuel that were allocated to it.
We would like to thank Yemen Today TV channel for their visit. This project is considered one of the biggest and most important projects in Yemen. The station is set to cover the electricity consumption of the whole Maghreb. We are also working on connecting lines to provide other provinces with electricity.
Everyone here in Maghreb is optimistic about the opening of the gas station, which will provide them with uninterrupted electricity and which will make these streets absent from the sounds of small generators and the frequent power cuts that last for days. Today, a dream has become a reality in Maghreb Governorate, in a city where the war is still raging on its walls, to multiply with it the challenges in providing basic services to the citizens. Despite these difficulties, the city constituted a unique model from the rest of the other governorates that suffer successive crises in various services, including electricity.
Here's a reminder of the main headlines. Warring parties in Yemen failed to agree on expanding the truce due to Houthi rejection. The chairman of the Presidential Leadership Council, Rashad Al-Alimi, accuses Houthis of being hostile to peace. Houthi militia attacks military and residential areas in Al-Dala hours after truce expired. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.